A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards, and I am glad you've joined the program today. So as I mentioned on Monday's show, we are talking about Gavin Newsom and his latest gun control proposal. In fact, Mark Oliva from the National Shooting Sports Foundation is sitting down with us to talk about what Gavin Newsom is calling for, but also what Gavin Newsom isn't talking about. Take a look and a listen. Hey, Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show, sir. It's good talking with you today.
It's great to see you, Cam. I appreciate you having us and then us back on the show.
Absolutely. So let me ask, because it seems to be one of two reactions to Gavin Newsom saying, well, I don't like what the Supreme Court's doing. We're going to do this Texas-style abortion law, but it's going to be gun control. There's folks who say, look, this is serious. This could really impact Californians. And then there are the folks who say, look, this is a political stunt. This doesn't really amount to anything. What is the NSSF's reaction to Newsom saying that he wants to empower private citizens to, sue gun makers and, I guess, gun possessors, if they are caught with a quote-unquote assault weapon in California?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We're waiting to see what the text of the proposed language that he wants in this legislation. That's really what it comes down to. The devil's always in the details, right? And especially when you talk about California gun laws, there's a lot of devils in those details. So we'll be interested to see what it's going to happen. But as we're starting to, trying to look into this and what it's going to mean for the industry, what it's going to mean for our customers, it is something that we think may be untenable. And it comes down to the fact is that you have a constitutionally protected, enumerated, God-given right to keep and bear arms. That is noted in the Constitution. And I'm not trying to mix the two different issues here of abortion and firearm possession, which, of course, is what Gavin Newsom's trying to do because it preaches to his base. And that's what he's trying to do with this. It makes a great splash in the media. It riles up the people who may be aligned with him on those two issues, on abortion rights and on gun control. But when you start talking about firearm possession, which is specifically mentioned in the Bill of Rights as a right of the individual, which has been affirmed by the Supreme Court, now we're having some issues. So if he's going to allow individuals to take lawsuits against other individuals or firearm manufacturers, there are a lot of legal obstacles that have to be overcome, not the least of which is the Constitution, but also the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act.
Okay, so how would the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act apply to what Newsom has proposed? Again, keeping in mind we don't have the actual text of the proposal, but what does the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act actually do? Because, again, to hear the gun control lobby say it, it indemnifies the firearms industry against being sued anytime, anywhere, for any purpose. Yeah. And I know that's not the case. So what does the law actually do?
Yeah, so the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act is bipartisan legislation that was passed in 2005, signed into law by President George W. Bush. And what it does, basically, it says that you cannot sue a manufacturer for the criminal actions of a non-associated third party. So someone who uses a firearm in a crime that is no way related to a firearm manufacturer, distributor, retailer, is not a member of that company, is not somebody who has any affiliation with the company, but criminally misuses that firearm in a crime, and you cannot go back and sue that manufacturer, that distributor, that retailer for selling a constitutionally protected item, and that product being the firearm itself. This would be akin to suing Budweiser and Ford for the crimes caused by drunk drivers. Budweiser has no responsibility in that. Neither does Ford have any responsibility. The responsibility lies with the individual breaking the law. And this is what the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act does. It does not give blanket immunity to the industry. The industry still can be held responsible for defects. It still can be held responsible for any kind of malfeasance within the companies. It can be held. Those things still apply. And it's not unique to the firearm industry. Similar protections right now, everybody who's getting their COVID shot needs to understand that the same sort of protections that the firearm industry enjoys through the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act also apply to pharmaceutical companies, specifically to the people who are producing these COVID vaccines. They cannot be sued because of the product that they make, because they're making it with these protections. Airline industry has, the same type of protections. Computer providers, service providers have the same type of protections. So this is not something that's unique to the industry. It just happens to be that the industry needed this legislation because there were harassing lawsuits that were defeated in court every time, that were being brought up by people like some of our favorite anti-gun people, like Governor Cuomo, when he was the Housing and Urban Housing Secretary, was bringing up these lawsuits, and these municipalities bringing these lawsuits. They were trying to bleed the industry dry through the death of 1,000 cuts, just tying them up in court. And that was happening in the late 90s, early 2000s, and this legislation put an end to that.
All right, so speaking of Cuomo, because you and I talked about this earlier this year, where Cuomo signed a bill into law in New York that basically says, hey, you know what, we can use the public nuisance statutes to sue fire manufacturers, basically arguing that their marketing compelled people to create crimes. And so that law is now on the books.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that Newsom, obviously the language that he's using and the impetus for his own gun control call is different. It's the Texas law. But it sounds to me like the intent is really the same here. We want to go after the firearms industry. We want to try to shut down the firearms industry. We don't want them to be able to make firearms available to American citizens. If we can't choke off the right to keep and bear arms at the individual gun owner level, well, let's destroy the industry and see what happens.
Yeah, and that's really what it is. The New York law tried to punch a hole right through the middle of the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. And shortly after that law was signed by Governor Cuomo, we put out a press release that said we had every intent to sue the state of New York over that law because it does run counter to any basic understanding of tort law. It just does not pass muster. And it also runs counter to the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, which essentially codifies what is understood as basic tort law. This attempt here in California is the same thing. They're trying to get at it any which way they can. They understand that they've been frustrated by getting it. They didn't get their champion, David Chipman, in as the head of the ATF. They understand that they've been frustrated that they couldn't get any gun control moved through Congress because the Senate is blocking all that from happening. So they're going to try and go at it at the state level. This is not a surprise to the industry. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody who's been watching the gun control side of this. But it also, as we're looking at it, we don't believe that this really has legs. We think that when it's confronted with the facts in a court of law, these types of pieces of legislation will be found to be unconstitutional and will be found to run counter to the way that we do business here in the United States. That Congress, not the states, Congress has the authority over interstate commerce, and that your protection, your right to keep and bear arms is protected by the Constitution, and that the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act is constitutional. It's been found to be constitutional by every court that's out there that's been challenged in it. And we think that these things are going to hold up. So again, these are nibbles around the edges, but they think they can find traction, but we don't believe they're constitutional. We believe that they will have success in court.
You know, and it seems to me, Mark, we should also point out the fact that quote unquote assault weapons are already banned in California. Like this is the thing that I don't think Gavin Newsom really understood what he was doing when he tried to open up this can of worms, because he said if the most efficient way to stop these guns from being here is to allow private citizens to sue, well, then let's do it. Okay, what does that say about the efficacy of all of the gun control laws that are already on the books in the state of California? I mean, the state of California has gone back and repeatedly redefined what a quote-unquote assault weapon is, kind of proving the point that this is a made-up, invented term. But I think they've done that, like 4 times since the 1990s, each definition broader than the last, more expansive than the last, trying to bring as many firearms as possible under that rubric. And yet here's Gavin Newsom seeming to acknowledge, maybe inadvertently, but acknowledging, it seems like these gun control laws don't stop bad actors. They don't stop violent criminals, but they've deprived how many Californians of owning some of the most commonly owned firearms in the country, not only AR-15s, not only modern sporting rifles, but you look at the roster of handguns that is present in California. No new models of handguns have been available for sale to consumers since microstamping came into effect a decade ago. And yet, despite all of those prohibitions that are aimed directly at legal, law-abiding, responsible gun owners, Gavin Newsom's still complaining about violent crime being out of control. At what point, I mean, I know at what point you and I would say, hey, maybe it's not the guns. Maybe we look somewhere else to try to reduce violent crime. But it seems to me like they're just going to keep going down this road here. And unfortunately, not only are gun owners paying the price, but crime victims are paying the price. People are dying needlessly. People are being assaulted. They're being carjacked. They're having their homes invaded because you've got politicians that are focused on the 80 to 100 million legal gun owners in this country, as opposed to the much smaller universe of violent criminals.
You're exactly right. And I think this is important. And you've pointed it out before. I think we've tried to point it out before, that two things on this. People like Governor Newsom will always point out, if we just had one more law. Well, you're right. That's an admission that the previous attempts at the laws that they said I needed just one more law and I could protect society didn't work. That they were all just trumped up ideas, and that really what it was going after was the wrong target. And again, what you didn't notice, the second point of this, and you were talking about this, is Governor Newsom came out and said that he was going to allow ordinary citizens, as well as municipalities, to go after the firearm industry, to go after individual gun owners for simply exercising their Second Amendment rights. But he didn't say anything about allowing them to go after the people who are perpetrating the crimes. Meanwhile, you have district attorneys who are turning out criminals literally the day they commit the crime, right back out onto the streets, they commit the same crime again. There's a crime wave that's happening in the city, just being documented across the media. And there's a refusal to address it. The LA County Sheriff is head to head with the LA District Attorney because he refuses to do his job and lock up criminals. And here you have the sheriff who's looking at this and he can't understand why somebody who refuses to do their job still has a job. So when he's targeting gun owners and not the criminals, and telling people that you can sue people who follow the law, but not hold those accountable who are breaking the law, who is Governor Newsom really representing? Is he representing the people of California, or is he representing the criminals of California? And I think that's right now a fairly obvious answer.
I unfortunately, I think you're right. And I think that this is, as you say, it's not just Gavin Newsom. I mean, it's, we've got a bunch of prosecutors out there, from Chesa Boudin in San Francisco to Kim Fox in Chicago to Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, who says that there's no crime problem in Philadelphia, even though homicides have reached an all-time high, who are, again, they are soft on crime. They simply believe that, in fact, I read a column from a Baltimore Sun columnist today that I think sort of it typifies this, calling for an army of social workers as opposed to actual law enforcement, actual consequences. Baltimore's another city, 7 years in a row of 300 plus homicides, going back to 2015 when you had the Freddie Gray riots. And coincidentally enough, Mark, ever since those riots happened, violent crime in Baltimore has been higher than it was before the riots. And what did we see last summer? Cities across the country erupt in riots. And yep, the riots have burned themselves out, but the violent crime is still at an increased level. And it seems to me like that's an issue that nobody really wants to talk about. They don't want to talk about police staffing levels. They don't want to talk about the actions of prosecutors. They simply want to say, well, look, a lot of people bought guns last year. Violent crime rose last year. Clearly, one led to the other.
Yeah, they always try to tie it. We've seen that Bloomberg's Everytown's propaganda piece, the Traces tried to do this. They desperately hold on to the narrative that law-abiding citizens exercising their Second Amendment rights is tied to the rise in crime, when I've tried to point out to them that the spike of crime started when these talk about defunding police and the riots started happening in these cities, and people started buying firearms to protect themselves. There are surveys that have borne that out, have shown us that the people who are buying guns to be able to protect themselves. Over half the firearms that are sold every year are handguns. Handguns, with very rare exception, are primarily used for either recreational target shooting or self-defense, either in the home or for concealed carry. They're not a very good application. Handguns using for bird hunting, it's just not going to work. So you have to look at what people are buying what type of gun for. And we've seen 21 million background checks last year for the sale of a gun. So far this year, we've had 16.7 million, already tracking to be the second strongest year on record. People are buying guns because they're concerned for their personal safety, because they no longer believe that their government that's representing them is representing them in a way that's going to keep them safe and keep their community safe. And we've seen this happen time and again. And when you have the governor of a state coming out saying that he wants to sue the manufacturers and sue those who are lawfully, legally exercising their rights, instead of going after the criminals, I think we understand where a lot of this problem lies, is in people who refuse to address what the problem is, and instead will scapegoat those who are doing everything they can to obey the law and keep themselves and their family safe.
Yep, absolutely. Mark Oliva with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. As always, sir, appreciate you joining us on the program today, and look forward to seeing you in person here in about a month or so.
Very excited to see you at SHOT Show. Can't wait to see everyone else attend. And Cam, it's always a pleasure talking.
Appreciate Mark's time, and yes, looking forward to our coverage from SHOT Show coming up in, let's see, a little more than a month from now. Wow, that's absolutely right. By the way, we're going to be doing some cool stuff for our VIP members. So if you're not a VIP member of Bearing Arms, you can always subscribe at bearingarms.com/subscribe, believe it or not. And you can use the promo code GUNRIGHTS to get a significant discount on your VIP membership. Not only will you get exclusive analysis, content, news stories, things you're not going to find anywhere else, but again, it also supports independent journalism. Your support really does allow us to do things like go to SHOT Show and talk to some of these major players within the firearms industry, Second Amendment advocates and activists alike, as well as introducing you to some cool folks who you might not have run across these individuals before. All right, now let's turn our attention to today's armed citizen story, our good deed of the day, as well as our recidivist report. We'll start there. I actually had two, but I had to settle on one. Here you go. Colorado Springs, where a Colorado Springs man shot by his wife during an assault, sentenced to probation. Yeah. So you've got a bit of an armed citizen story here, in addition to a case involving somebody who really should be spending some time behind bars, but who got a sweetheart of a plea deal. 30-year-old Morgan Chess pleaded guilty back in October with prosecutors to felony menacing in an assault back in April involving his wife. On Monday, he was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation in a Colorado state court. That plea agreement also bundling two of his other cases inside. So, assaulting his wife, driving drunk and evading police, and then a misdemeanor menacing case also involving his wife, all wrapped up, tied up in a neat little bow, presented to Mr. Chess, and he was told, basically, listen, you're not going to be able to drive until your eligibility is restored, but for the next 3 years, you're on probation. I mean, this was an assault that was so severe that Morgan Chess's wife was forced to defend herself with a firearm. She told police that when she arrived home from work, she found her husband already drunk. He proceeded to pick several fights with her that eventually led to him beating, choking, and threatening to kill her. And she said that the incident was the latest of hundreds of times that Morgan Chess had been violent with her. Now, again, he's only charged with this one incident. But his wife says, look, this has happened a lot of times before. Court records indicate that April Chess had sought a temporary protection order against her husband back in April. It doesn't indicate if the temporary order was upgraded to a permanent one in a separate hearing or if that temporary order is still in effect. But again, here is a violent assault that led to a woman using a firearm in self-defense, and the court allows him to plead guilty to a lesser charge, to bundle in other criminal cases, including one other felony case, and allow him to walk away on probation. I'm just sort of gobsmacked by that. Now, today's armed citizen story, Greensboro, North Carolina, where a store employee shot and killed a 17-year-old robbery suspect. This was Monday night. Officers called to the tobacco and vape store in Greensboro, North Carolina, for a report of a robbery. According to officials, 3 men went into the store, took an undisclosed amount of cash at gunpoint. According to police, a store employee shot one of the robbery suspects during that robbery. That suspect dying from their injuries, identified as 17-year-old Gabriel Malachi Kalu of Greensboro, North Carolina. We don't have a lot of details about this case, but it sure sounds like police are investigating this as an act of self-defense, in addition, of course, to the armed robbery there in Greensboro, North Carolina. We'll bring you any details as they become available. And finally today, our good deed of the day from St. John, Indiana, where police officer Daryl Schaefer, in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing to save the life of 2 children who were the unwitting victims of a police chase that ended up with a car in a retention pond. Officer Schaefer said he didn't know if there were kids in the car. He had followed this car into Illinois, then back to Indiana after the driver allegedly fled a traffic stop. But dash cam shows that Schaefer quickly shed like 40 pounds of police equipment, jumped into that pond in December in Indiana to save anybody who needed rescuing because the driver lost control of the vehicle, ended up in the water. He told reporters on Monday that when he waded over to the vehicle in the water that was about chest deep, again in this retention pond, he saw a 3-year-old child floating in the back seat. He was able to pull her out through a front passenger window. He said, I don't know how much time I had to get her out. And then officers told him to look for another child, an infant. He said he didn't see a baby, a car seat, or anything else. He said, all I could see was water. He said there were 2 bags of clothes that I moved out of the way. And he said, I still couldn't see the baby. He said, but then I reached into the water and I felt the leg. He said, I pulled her upside down out of the water and I handed her to the Lake County Sheriff's officer that was on the embankment to get her to the ambulance. The 8-month-old child wasn't crying, but was alert and cognizant after being underwater for about 90 seconds. Schaefer said, I didn't know if she was breathing. I just wanted to get her out of the water and into the medic's hands. The children did nothing wrong. They were in a bad situation that they should not ever have been put in. He's absolutely right about that. St. John Police Chief Stephen Flores says there's no question that Schaefer is a hero. He said, very fortunate that he was there when he was there and that he got to them as soon as possible, saying, I truly believe that his efforts saved those kids' lives. During this traffic stop that led to the chase, officers discovered that there was a 26-year-old male passenger from Chicago who had an active warrant for failure to appear on drug-related charges out of Iowa. Police tried to place him under arrest. The man ended up running away from officers. Actually ended up in a different retention pond at one point where he was taken in by police and taken to a hospital for exposure. But the driver of this vehicle takes off from the traffic stop. That's what the officers gave chase. According to investigators, the male driver could face a criminal charge. The male passenger could face a criminal charge for fleeing. Obviously, the outstanding warrants. Female driver may face a felony resisting charge as well as 2 counts of felony neglect of an independent. I would certainly think that that would be appropriate there. But regardless of the criminal charges that the suspects in this case might face, thankfully, again, the 2 children who were the victims of those adults in that car, safe and sound, thanks to the quick reaction and fast response by Officer Daryl Schaefer there in St. John, Indiana. We thank you, sir, for your very good deed. That is all the time we've got for you on this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company, but we will be back tomorrow with even more of the latest Second Amendment news and information that you need to know about. Again, be sure to check out bearingarms.com throughout the day. We're updating the site constantly with the latest stories about your right to keep and bear arms, the threats to them, and the success stories as well. The Second Amendment success stories, we don't ignore those. We might even have some additional armed citizen stories for you on the website. You never know. Anyway, we'll see you back here tomorrow. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.